Welcome back. We are diving deep under the waters of Madison's lakes and discovering the treasures that have laid there for maybe decades or longer. And yes, I do recognize that sounds like the setup for maybe the coolest local novel, but in this case, it's also the cover story for this month's edition of Madison Magazine. That's our sister company, and written by none other than the man that directs so much coverage for News 3 Now. That's our assignment editor, Logan Rude. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I cannot tell you how glad I am to have him sitting here. I mean, this guy is, before we even get into the magazine, we're going to talk about it in a second, but I'm going to talk a little bit about who Logan is. You don't recognize him, but he is absolute critical. I call him the traffic director of the newsroom, right? That's what assignment editors do. So all the news that you see on the show, he probably had a hand in some way, getting our teams there, whatnot. So you do a lot, and apparently he's got free time to write cover stories. You got to take a look at this. This is just a beautiful spread. It's called Diving into Madison's Underwater History. It's absolutely gorgeous. Logan, tell me a little bit about, what prompts this kind of story?
I mean, really just sort of started off as a pitch from the folks over with the magazine. I actually started off as an intern well before my time at News 3 here with that magazine, and the editor, Andy Bailing, had reached out and said, you know, we're working on this idea primarily based on the visuals. Their creative side, I'd kind of thought, you know, it'd be a really great opportunity for some really creative photography, and so that's sort of where the idea started from.
These visuals are gorgeous.
And yeah,
props to the photographer there.
From there, just kind of evolved into, you know, what can we kind of explore with that idea.
So this is what you're doing every time you sneak out of the newsroom and we can't find you when there's breaking news.
More or
Is that
less.
True?
Yep.
Yeah, I got it. We'll talk about that off screen. Tell me what makes, I want to hear first about some of the most perhaps startling discoveries.
So startling, maybe not very surprising first, is there's a whole lot of trash underneath the surface. The amount of times...
Stop throwing your trash in the lake, first of all. Stop doing it. Anyway, sorry, back to you.
The amount of times that some of my interviews had said, yeah, you know, the vast majority of things they find is just garbage. We're talking bottles, cans, trash that flew off boats, a number of charcoal grills, surprisingly. But aside from that, I mean, yeah, definitely a long history of these really fascinating finds, dating back recently up to sort of the 1950s with some old cars that had fallen through the ice, and sort of most notably, and we talk about this pretty heavily in the story, a whole lot of relics from the Ho-Chunk people who have lived in this area for thousands and thousands of years, dating back 12,000 years or so.
You also talked about a car. I mean, an entire car in a cold case in the lake. How does it even happen? Yeah,
well, back in sort of the mid-1900s, there weren't any sort of hard and fast laws about driving out onto the lake with your personal vehicle, so it was a pretty popular recreational activity in the wintertime. And yeah, there was this case, and I believe it was the 1950s or so. Two men had gone out drinking. Sort of as the story's told, they were known for being pretty avid drinkers and took their car out on the ice one night, and they were never seen again. So one of the people I had spoken with for this story, Rick Krieger, is a local diver and has played a big role in sort of mapping the bottom of the area lakes. Sort of stumbled upon the car one day while trolling on Lake Wabeesa. A few days later, went back with his own scuba gear, went down to dive, and brought up the license plate. They ran some checks with the DOT archives and came back as the car that belonged to one of the men who went missing all those decades ago.
If for no other reason to get the magazine, you guys got to see the picture of this car. We'll be showing you a picture too, but you got to get the hard copy to just see what this car looked like. Let's talk big picture. Anyone who lives in Madison is in love with the lakes. Maybe I'm speaking for myself and you. I know you're in love with the lakes. Yeah. I am. There's a deep just cultural tie between Madison and its lakes. How does the things we find in the lakes kind of contribute to this larger story of Madison's lakes? Yeah,
I mean, like I mentioned, the Ho-Chunk people were sort of the first groups who settled in this area dating back 12,000 years. And, you know, with that much history, with that much time just spent in the area, there's, of course, going to be all kinds of little clues and artifacts that point back to their time here. So another big part of the story, of course, being the story of those dugout canoes that were found in the lake, which we covered here at News 3 over the past couple years. 2 separate canoes found, each of those dating back thousands of years on their own. So it really just sort of traces this really interesting timeline of showing the scope of how many people have lived here, how many stories have been told in the area. And I think those canoes have really sort of been a focal point to showcase how long those folks have been here.
An absolutely phenomenal find. Now, we've been kidding around a lot. If you can't tell, we're pretty close friends off the screen. But I don't want to have this segment without kind of closing on a little bit of a memorial note. I'm so glad you guys did this over at Madison Magazine, but you can't talk about diving in Madison's lakes without talking about the late Jim Skibo. He was a state archaeologist. He recently passed away in a diving accident. And just talk to me a little bit about how you guys decided to try and include his legacy, because it's an incredible legacy that he left.
Yeah, I mean, he had a huge impact on a lot of the folks over at the Wisconsin Historical Society. I personally wasn't able to speak with him before his passing, but Tamara Thompson, who was the woman who actually discovered the two of those Ho-Chunk canoes, worked very closely with him and spoke really highly of him with his involvement in, sort of green lighting the excavation process for those artifacts. He was actually the one who sort of gave the final go-ahead to get the first of those canoes carbon dated, which really put in perspective the gravity of that discovery. And yeah, by all accounts from folks I've talked with, he was just an amazing presence and really supportive of, doing these types of digs and figuring out what these types of discoveries can sort of share about our context in this city.
I had the absolute pleasure of meeting him once. I covered the second recovery of the second canoe, and just a larger than life person in every sense of the way. I think it's a fitting note to close this out on. Keep writing cover stories so I can keep finding reasons to bring you on the show and put you on air.
Anytime.
All right. Just ahead, a sit down with the man behind a state bill that's looking to save moms and dads some money on children's goods. Political reporter Will Keneally is next.